Michael Sanders sat in his spacious office, leaning back in his soft leather chair, gazing thoughtfully out the window. The streets below were bustling, but on this evening, the noise seemed distant. His mind swirled with thoughts of the upcoming weekend. Ellie, their youngest daughter, had gone off to school camp and wouldn't be back until Sunday, while Sophie had already been at college for a few weeks. The quiet at home offered a chance to revisit forgotten rituals with his wife, candlelit dinners and unhurried conversations about life. Michael glanced at the clock and decided that today he could allow himself to leave work early. He dreamed of a quiet evening with Laura, perhaps a walk through the old park they both loved so much. We need to remember what it's like to just be together, he thought, gathering his papers and putting away his laptop. The house greeted him not with its usual silence but with an empty stillness, as though something unseen lingered in the air. The kitchen was empty, though the light was on. Michael felt a faint unease and headed toward the bedroom. "Laura, are you home?" he called out as he walked down the hallway. The answer didn't come immediately. "Yes, Michael, I'm here." He entered the room and froze. Laura was sitting at her vanity, applying a bright shade of lipstick. She was dressed in an elegant black dress, with the pearl necklace he'd given her last Christmas around her neck. At her feet was an open overnight bag packed with clothes. "Wow, you look stunning," Michael said, trying to mask his confusion. "Did I forget something? Do we have plans for the weekend?" Laura set down the lipstick and looked at him through the mirror. Her gaze was focused and serious. "No, Michael, you didn't forget anything. These are my plans," she said, carefully choosing her words. "I'm leaving for the weekend." Michael frowned, not understanding what was happening. "What do you mean, leaving? Where?" His voice wavered, though he tried to stay calm. "I have a meeting," Laura continued, standing up and turning to face him. "It's just one weekend, Michael. I need this, to feel like myself again. I thought you'd understand." He took a step back, as if struck. A dull ache of pain and confusion flared in his chest. "Are you serious, Laura?" He looked at her hopefully, waiting for her to laugh and admit it was a joke. But her expression remained impenetrable. "Yes, I'm serious," she said softly but firmly. "I need to do this for myself, so I don't feel empty." "For yourself? But you're not planning to spend this time alone, are you? Who is this man you're planning to find yourself with?" Michael's voice sharpened, his anger barely contained. Laura looked away. "His name doesn't matter. We're just friends. He's married, he has kids. It means nothing. I didn't want to hide this from you, that's why I'm telling you now. You call this honesty?" Michael whispered, as though the air had been sucked from his lungs. "Looking me in the eye and telling me you're going to another man, that's honesty? I didn't want to do this behind your back. It's just a weekend, and I'll come home, and everything will be as it was before." Michael stared at her in silence. Did she really believe what she was saying? As if this was some bizarre, twisted form of a therapeutic break that would somehow make their marriage stronger. "How long have you been planning this, Laura?" he asked, feeling his face burn with anger. "A few weeks." "Michael, please try to understand." "Understand," he interrupted, his voice trembling. "Understand that my wife is going to spend the weekend with another man and then come back like nothing happened?" Laura stepped closer and placed her hand on his shoulder. "This doesn't change anything between us. I love you, Michael. I'm just tired, and I need a break. Life keeps moving, and this constant monotonous routine is killing me. I need to clear my head, and then everything will go back to normal, don't worry." He stepped back, shrugging her hand off. "You're wrong. It's already changed everything." The silence in the room was deafening. Laura lowered her eyes, realizing her words had failed to reach him. Michael turned and walked out of the bedroom, his footsteps echoing down the hallway. In his office, he shut the door behind him and tried to calm himself. The emotions hit in waves, sweeping away any attempt at rational thought. He grabbed his phone, his fingers instinctively finding an old number he had saved but hadn't used in years. He dialed it. "Hello, Jessica, this is Michael Sanders," he said, his voice shaking with tension. Panic set in, and he quickly hung up. He stood in his office, unable to shake the numbness brought on by his conversation with Laura. Her words still echoed in his head, like sound reverberating through an empty hall. Over and over, he replayed the scene in the bedroom, searching for any sign that it had been a nightmare, one that would end with the first rays of morning sunlight. But it was all real, harsh and unrelenting. The ringing of the phone pulled him back to the present moment. He picked up, and a familiar voice filled the silence. "Michael, are you still there?" Jessica's voice was as soft as it had always been. "Yes, sorry for calling so suddenly," he said, struggling to keep his voice steady. I needed someone to talk to. You sound shaken. Is everything okay?" Her concern was tangible even across the distance, and Michael felt some of the tension in his chest begin to ease. "No, Jessica, nothing is okay," he admitted, for the first time allowing himself to acknowledge the full horror of the evening. "Laura just told me she's leaving for the weekend, with another man." Silence followed. Michael could hear her breathing as she processed his words. "What?" she finally said, her voice trembling. "I can't believe it. Laura? I always thought you two were one of the strongest couples I knew." "I thought so too," Michael said bitterly. "But I guess I was wrong." Jessica didn't say anything at first, but her silence spoke volumes. Shock, disbelief, and a deep, unspoken sympathy. After a moment, she broke the quiet. "You shouldn't be alone tonight. Why don't you come over? I'm making dinner, and I've got a good bottle of wine. It won't hurt either of us to have some company." Michael closed his eyes, memories surfacing of the days they'd worked together, her constant support, the warmth she always seemed to radiate. "Maybe that's a good idea," he said, feeling the tension in his shoulders ease, just slightly. "Great, I'll be waiting," she said, her voice lightening with a small smile, like a reminder of old times. An hour later, Michael stood in front of Jessica's door, his heart pounding like a teenager's. The door opened, and he was met by her familiar, reassuring smile. Her blue eyes, warm and full of concern, immediately clouded with worry as she took in his face. "Come in," she said, stepping back to let him inside. "You look like you haven't slept in years." "Feels about right," Michael admitted, stepping into the living room. The space was cozy, the light from a table lamp reflecting off shelves filled with books and photographs of her son, Luke. "Sit down. I'll grab the wine," Jessica said and disappeared into the kitchen. Michael sat on the couch, glancing around. The house radiated warmth and comfort, something he hadn't felt in his own home for a long time. Returning with 2 glasses of wine, Jessica sat down beside him and looked at him intently. "Tell me everything," she said softly. He sighed and began to talk. The words poured out of him like water from a broken dam. He told her about the conversation with Laura, her revelation, and his bewilderment. Jessica listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding to show she was there, present. "I never would have thought Laura was capable of something like this," she said finally, when he'd finished. "You always spoke about her with such love." "I did love her," Michael said, lowering his gaze to the glass in his hand. "But now I don't know what to think." Jessica gently placed her hand on his shoulder. "Michael, you deserve to be with someone who values you, who really sees you," she said, her voice quiet but firm. He looked at her, feeling something in his heart stir at her words. Before he could respond, his phone rang. He glanced at the screen. It was Laura. "Sorry, I need to take this," he said, standing up and taking a few steps away. "Michael," Laura's voice was anxious, almost desperate. "I know you're angry, and maybe I deserve that. But please, don't do anything that will destroy us completely. I want to come back. I want everything to be like it was before." He closed his eyes, feeling anger and pain wrestle within him. "It's too late, Laura. You already destroyed it," he said and ended the call. "Is everything okay?" Jessica asked, standing and walking toward him, her eyes full of concern. "I think it is," he said, turning back to her, feeling as though the weight of everything was slowly lifting from his shoulders. Maybe for the first time in a long while. Jessica smiled, and they sat together as the night quietly gave way to the first light of dawn. Morning found Michael and Jessica still in the living room, bathed in the soft glow of the rising sun. They had spent the entire night talking, reminiscing about the old days, sharing thoughts on lives that hadn't gone as planned, and rediscovering something long lost: warmth, understanding, and simple humanity. Jessica laughed quietly, recalling a memory from work. "Remember when I accidentally sent your report to the CEO with the title "The Most Boring Thing You'll Ever Read"? Michael chuckled too, feeling a lightness he hadn't experienced in ages. "Oh yeah. I spent half an hour trying to convince him it was a joke. Thanks for that support," he said, smiling at her with genuine gratitude. "Well, it worked, didn't it?" she teased, winking at him. "After that, he read every single one of your reports just to make sure they weren't that boring." For a moment, the world outside this house felt distant, as though they had stepped 10 years back to a time when everything was simpler. But the truth of the present quickly reminded them where they were. Michael looked away, taking a deep breath. Jessica, what if Laura? What if she doesn't stop? Even if she comes back, could we ever be the same again? Jessica took his hand, her eyes meeting his. You need to ask yourself a different question, Michael. Do you want things to be the same again? After everything that's happened? He froze, the weight of her words settling deep into his chest. They struck right at the heart of him, peeling back the layers of denial he'd tried to wrap around himself. In that moment, Michael realized the truth wasn't just about Laura's betrayal, it was about something he had lost within himself long ago. I don't even know what I want anymore, he said quietly, releasing her hand. Maybe that's for the best, Jessica replied, gently squeezing his fingers. Sometimes not knowing is the first step to finding something new. Something real. The sound of a knock on the door broke the silence, making them both jump. Michael glanced at his watch. It was far too early for unannounced visitors. Are you expecting someone? He asked, his brow furrowing. Jessica shook her head. No, she said, standing up. But maybe it's my neighbor. He sometimes comes by in the mornings for tools. Michael remained seated as she walked to the door. But instead of a neighbor's voice, a tense, familiar voice echoed from the hallway. Jessica, I know Michael is here. Please let me in. We need to talk. Jessica froze, and Michael felt his heart start to pound. Laura's here. She came. Michael, Jessica said quietly, glancing back over her shoulder. Do you want me to let her in? He stood, his eyes narrowing as emotion surged, fear, anger, pain, all colliding into a storm inside him. Finally, he nodded. Let her in. It's time to lay it all out. Jessica opened the door, and Laura stepped inside. Her face was drawn, her eyes red and swollen from tears. She looked first at Jessica, then at Michael. The silence in the room was heavy and oppressive. I knew I'd find you here, Laura said, her gaze locked onto her husband. I couldn't wait any longer, Michael. We need to talk. He gestured toward the armchair across from him, and Laura sat down, nervously twisting the hem of her skirt. Jessica lingered by the doorway, ready to leave, but Michael stopped her. Stay, he said firmly. She needs to know the truth. Laura shot a glance at Jessica, confusion and jealousy flickering across her face. The truth? What are you talking about? Michael sighed and sat down across from her. About us, Laura. About what happened, and what comes next. You came here to say something, so say it. She dropped her gaze, her lips trembling as she struggled to speak. I know what I did was terrible, Laura began, her voice unsteady. I can't justify it, but I was lost, Michael. Everything felt so empty after Sophie left. I was looking for something to make me feel alive again. And I chose the worst possible way. Yes, I lied to you. And it wasn't the first time I met with him. I didn't know what I was doing. I thought it would help us, help me find a way back to you, but I went too far. I see that now. I'm telling you the truth because I'm hoping you'll forgive me. Forgive you. Michael cut her off, his voice sharp and incredulous as he stared directly into her eyes. You thought you could just leave, come back, and everything would be fine? That I would understand? Do you even hear yourself, Laura? Do you have any idea what you've done? I know, she cried, her voice breaking. I know I messed up, Michael. But I came back because I want to fix this. I want us to be okay again. Michael shook his head, his jaw tight. I can't forgive you. Not after this. You made your choice, Laura, and you destroyed everything. The silence that followed was thick and suffocating. Laura's shoulders slumped as the weight of his words hit her. She looked at Jessica again, realization dawning in her expression. She wasn't just losing Michael to her own mistakes. You're making a mistake, she whispered, her voice trembling. Michael stood up, his expression cold and resolute. No, Laura. You made the mistake. And now you have to live with it. Laura lifted her head, tears shimmering in her eyes. You were with her, weren't you? She turned her gaze to Jessica. I know this isn't just friendship. Yes, Michael answered calmly. We were together. But this isn't about revenge, Laura. It's a reminder of who I was, when I was seen, when I was valued. But we can try again, Laura exclaimed, her voice almost pleading. We can get through this together, rebuild the trust. Jessica stood silently, watching the conversation unfold, while Michael wrestled with his next words. The silence returned, heavy and oppressive, pressing down on his shoulders. "Laura, I can't go back," he finally said, his voice quiet but firm. "You destroyed what we had. And I've changed, too. All this time, I thought we could face anything together. But now I realize that I don't want to anymore." Laura dropped her head, tears rolling freely down her cheeks. "I've lost everything," she whispered. Michael looked at her with genuine sympathy, but his decision was final. "Yes, but that was your choice, Laura. And I've made mine." Jessica stepped closer, gently resting her hand on Michael's shoulder. Laura sat slumped in the chair, her shoulders sagging under the weight of the world. The tears kept falling, but she made no effort to wipe them away. Her gaze darted between Michael and Jessica, and with each passing moment, her face grew more contorted with pain and realization. "Michael," she said, her voice trembling, tinged with both despair and a flicker of hope. "I know it's useless to ask for forgiveness. I know I've lost you, but please, think of the girls. Think of Sophie and Ellie. We can try for their sake. We can live under one roof, until they're stronger, until things settle." Michael looked at her, his eyes void of anger, filled only with sadness. "Laura, I love our daughters more than anything in this world. And I'll do whatever it takes to make sure they feel safe and know they're loved. But I can't pretend anymore. We can't stay together just for appearances. That would only make things worse." Jessica, who had remained silent, took a step back, sensing it was time to leave them alone. She touched Michael's shoulder gently and whispered, "I'll be in the kitchen if you need me." As she walked away, Laura clasped her hands in her lap, as though trying to shield herself from an invisible pain. "What if I change, Michael?" she asked, her voice full of fragile hope, though the question itself sounded hollow. "What if I prove to you I can be the person I used to be?" Michael shook his head slowly, his expression soft yet resolute. "That's the thing, Laura. Neither of us can go back to who we were." Laura's breath hitched, her face crumpling further under the weight of his words. Silence once again filled the room, leaving only the sound of her quiet sobs and Michael's steady breathing as they both sat in the wreckage of what had once been their life together. Michael sighed, feeling the tension once again tighten his muscles. "It's not about what you can or can't do, Laura. It's about trust. It's not just words and promises. You broke it, and it can't be pieced back together so easily. I thought that our 20 years of marriage were something unshakable, but now I see how quickly it can all be destroyed over a single weekend." Laura lowered her gaze, her fingers clenching into tight fists. "It was a mistake. A stupid, thoughtless mistake," she whispered, almost choking on her own words. "I was trying to feel alive again, but it's only now that I realize how much I love you and how terrified I am of losing you." Michael stood and walked over to the window. Outside, the world carried on as usual. Cars passed by, someone walked down the sidewalk with their dog. But for him, everything had changed. "Laura, I don't want to hate you," he said, not turning around. "But I also can't live with you anymore. I need to figure out who I am without this pain and without your excuses." Laura suddenly stood, her face hardening. "You talk about pain, Michael? What about me? Do you think it doesn't hurt me to see you with Jessica? To know you found comfort in someone else while I was falling apart?" He turned to face her, and something new flickered in his eyes, an understanding that this wasn't just his fight. "You're right," he said calmly. "It hurts us both. But the difference is, you made that choice. You left first. I was just trying to survive what you did." Laura buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with fresh sobs. She knew there were no more excuses, no more words that could undo what had been done. Silence blanketed the room again, as they stood across from each other like strangers, two people who had once been bound by love and trust. Now there was a chasm between them, one that could never be bridged. Finally, Laura lifted her head, acceptance reflected in her tear-streaked face. "All right, Michael. If you want a divorce, I won't fight it. I'll accept whatever you decide, but please, don't make us enemies for the girls' sake. Let them see that we're still a family, even if we're no longer together." Michael nodded, feeling the last shadow of anger leave him, replaced by something resembling relief. "We'll always be their parents, Laura. And that's already more than enough." The kitchen door creaked softly, and Jessica stepped out, avoiding Laura's gaze. Her eyes met Michael's, and in that look, there was more than just understanding. It was a quiet, unwavering support, wordless and unconditional. "I think I should go," Laura said, keeping her eyes fixed on Michael. "I'll pack my things and find somewhere to stay. We'll talk about it, Michael said gently. There's no need to rush. Laura turned and walked toward the door. Her silhouette disappeared beyond the threshold, and the room suddenly felt empty. Jessica moved closer, her fingers brushing lightly against Michael's hand. Are you okay? She asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper. No, he said, sinking onto the couch. But maybe, this is the first step toward being okay. They sat together, and in the silence that followed, there was no pain anymore, just a quiet hope that perhaps something better lay ahead. The days after the conversation with Laura stretched into a long period of reflection and careful words. Michael worked hard to keep things steady for his daughters, even as the house felt quieter than ever before. What had once been a comforting silence now felt hollow, stripped of the joy of familiar family sounds. Laura moved in with her sister, giving everyone space to process what had happened. The day came when Ellie and Sophie were told about the divorce. It was a rare evening when both girls were home, gathered in the living room under the same roof. Dad, why did Mom leave? Ellie asked, her voice trembling with tears she struggled to hold back. She looked smaller than her 17 years, clutching a soft blanket tightly in her hands, as though it could shield her from reality. Sophie, older and more perceptive, narrowed her eyes, carefully studying her father's expression and tone. Michael sighed, choosing his words carefully. In the doorway, Jessica stood quietly, her presence reassuring, as though silently anchoring him in this moment. Girls, this is a difficult time for all of us, Michael began, his voice calm but strained. Your mom and I have decided that it's better for us to go our separate ways. It wasn't an easy decision, and I know it hurts both of you. Ellie bit her lip, her wide eyes brimming with confusion and disbelief. Why? Her voice cracked, and she glanced quickly at Sophie, who remained silent, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. Michael took a steadying breath, his gaze soft but unwavering. Your mom and I realize that we can't make each other happy anymore, he said carefully, avoiding the painful details. But that doesn't change how much we love you. We will always be your parents, and we will always be a family, just in a different way. Ellie wiped at her eyes, looking down at the blanket in her hands. It won't be the same, she whispered. No, Michael admitted, his voice quiet but steady. It won't. But we're going to make sure that you both feel loved and safe. That's never going to change. Sophie finally spoke, her voice calm but tinged with sadness. Are you sure this is what's best? Michael looked at both of his daughters, his heart heavy but resolute. I think so. I know it's hard to understand right now, but sometimes letting go is the only way to move forward. For all of us. Jessica stepped back from the doorway, giving the family their space, but her quiet presence lingered like a steadying force. Michael glanced at her for a brief moment, drawing strength before returning his full attention to his daughters, who sat together on the couch, their world shifting beneath them. It's okay to be sad or angry, he said gently. Whatever you're feeling, it's okay. Michael looked at his daughters and felt a dull ache swell in his chest. He knew the road to healing would be long and uncertain, filled with questions and difficult days. But in that moment, despite all the pain, he felt a flicker of hope. They were strong. They would get through this, together. The next morning, Michael met Laura at the lawyer's office to discuss the terms of the divorce. It was their first face-to-face meeting since that painful conversation at Jessica's house. Laura looked exhausted, her eyes red as though she hadn't slept all night. She nervously fidgeted with the documents on the table. Michael, I want you to know that I'm not going to make this process any harder, she said as the lawyer entered the room. I just want the girls to be okay. I appreciate that, Laura, he said, meeting her eyes. And I promise to do everything I can to make this transition as painless as possible for them. They began discussing the details, the house, joint accounts, and arrangements for the children. Laura agreed to stay in the house so the girls wouldn't feel like their lives had completely unraveled. You can come over any time you want to see them, Laura said, her voice soft and filled with regret. I won't stand in the way of your relationship with them. Michael nodded, a bitter wave of gratitude and sorrow rising inside him. Thank you, Laura, he said quietly. That means a lot. They signed the documents, and the lawyer slid the folder aside, marking the end of the official proceedings. But before standing up, Laura looked at Michael, her gaze full of emotion. I hope that one day you'll find it in your heart to forgive me, she said. Not for us, but for yourself. He held her gaze, unsure of what to say. The pain still churned inside him, but there were small seeds of forgiveness, fragile but beginning to sprout through the layers of hurt. I hope so too, he replied softly. They parted ways, each walking in opposite directions, knowing this separation was the start of a new chapter in their lives. The months passed, and life slowly began to settle into a new rhythm. Michael spent more time with his daughters, focusing on supporting them and rebuilding their sense of security. Jessica became an important part of his life, though she respected his boundaries and never rushed him. One evening, Ellie approached him while he was reading in the living room. "Dad, Jessica's really nice," she said. "I see the way you look at her. You smile more than you used to." Michael set the book aside and looked at his daughter. Her words were simple, but they carried a quiet wisdom far beyond her years. "Thank you, Ellie," he said. "It means a lot to hear you say that." "We're going to be okay, Dad," she said, wrapping her arms around him. "I know it's going to be hard, but we'll get through it." He hugged her tightly, feeling tears prick at the corners of his eyes. For the first time in a long while, he felt that the future, though uncertain, held a glimmer of light. "We'll get through this together," he whispered, holding her close. And in that moment, surrounded by his daughter's warmth and the quiet hum of the house, Michael knew that healing was not a single moment but a journey. One step at a time, they were finding their way forward. And the hope he once thought lost was beginning to shine again. And that's where today's story ends. Thank you for watching to the end. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like and comment. We'd love to discuss this story with you. See you in the next video.